Nancy Tremaine is a lifelong contact experiencer. She's the author of two landmark books, one titled Symbiosis and the other one Preordained. She first came forward with her story in September 2011 and has spent the past 9 years sharing her message, and she hopes the story will help others come forward. Nancy joins us now. Hello, Nancy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, you've written a couple of fascinating books, really must reads for our audience, Symbiosis and Preordained. But I wanted to take you back firstly to when it all began for you. It was 1961 in September. And can you tell us a little bit about that first experience?
Well, it was July of 1961, and it was my girlfriend Cindy and I was over at her house. We were playing. We were 12 years old at the time. And we grew up in Novi, Michigan, which was a small village. It was all trees and woods, unpopulated. Homes were starting to be built. I was inside playing with her, and Cindy's father called us outside. And we could hear in his voice that it was urgency. And when we walked out that front door, our lives went from black and white to a color movie. There was a ship, a silver ship. I call it a flying saucer at 12 years old. And it was hovering above a tree, just slightly above a tree between our two homes. It was beautiful. I didn't feel any fear at that point. It was just beautiful. It had a large, wide belt of red, green, and white lights that were either flashing or rotating. They were going so fast you couldn't tell, but it was completely silent. And the funny thing is, Cindy's father was adjusting a small tripod telescope. And I didn't understand it because the ship was right in front of us. I mean, it was right in front of us. And neighbors started to come out of the homes. And they were standing there, and nobody said a word. And then we watched as a Novi, Michigan police car coasted. It actually coasted. Everything was dirt roads back then. And it coasted and stopped right in front of where we were, Cindy and her father and I were standing. And you could hear the rocks on the tires, the stones. It was that quiet. And the two police officers got out of the car, and they walked backwards up the incline where we were all standing. And I grabbed the police officer's arm, and I said, it was so difficult just to get out 3 simple words. Mm-hmm. They came out in slow motion. Is this real? Because I had to know that everybody else was seeing what I was seeing. And I was willing the ship to stay there. I wanted it to stay there forever. I wanted everyone to see it. And I kept telling it, oh, stay there in my mind. The police officer didn't answer. Now at this point, we're watching a car coming down Meadowbrook Road towards us. Now Meadowbrook Road is the road that my house is on. And the car is coming closer and closer, and it's putting itself right underneath. Here's the ship, putting itself right underneath the ship. And when it does, a beam of light came out the bottom left-hand side of that ship, and it was aimed at the car. And we stood there wondering what is going to happen when this beam of light hits this. It was aimed at the hood of the car.
Yeah.
And the second it hit it, the car was immobilized. I started jumping up and down at this point. I was a mild hysteria, whatever it was. And the ship, I'm yelling, over here, over here. And the ship tilted on its side. And it spoke 3 words, we see you. And I realized, even at the young age, that ship was alive. I realized it was alive. And that's when the fear set in. And I again grabbed the police officer and I said, do something. And then it jumps from that moment I was never allowed out past dusk. My father was very strict. And it jumps from that moment to I was home with my dad, and he was kneeling on the kitchen floor holding me and telling me that I was home and that I was safe and that he loved me. And I couldn't understand why it was dark. It was getting dark out. The door was open to the kitchen and I could see. And my dad would never have let me be. I was 10 to 9. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was 10 minutes to 9. He would never have let me be out at that time. And I called my mother. She was working. And my dad said I could call her. And she said, I know, I've had several customers come in the store and they saw it. And I was silenced that night. I mean, silenced. My father shook me and told me that I was never to speak. But that night and many nights after that, I stood on the headboard of my bed and I would chant, please come back and get me. Why would I say that? And who was I asking to come back and get me?
Did you experience missing time during that event?
Oh, there had to be missing time because my dad got home from work at 5 minutes after 6 every night, like clockwork. And I wasn't allowed out past 7:30 or dusk. And it was 10 minutes to 9 when I got home and it was dark, getting dark. So yes, but I didn't understand missing time. I didn't understand or even really think about the connection of the missing time. So for the next 50 years, Cindy and I never spoke about it. No one ever spoke about it. I went to therapists over the years and I would beg them to hypnotize me because that was the only word I knew. Mm-hmm. And I said, I know there's something inside me that has to come out. And I knew it was connected to a burning sensation that I would get to my nose. And every time that burning sensation would come to my nose every year or two, I would try to grab it because I knew the memories were right there and they were gone that quick. Anyways, the therapist would just give me a new medication.
Do you think you were taken on board the craft that night?
Well, I know I was, and so was Cindy, but we didn't know that. For 50 years, we didn't know that. All we knew, and we never spoke about it, even with each other, was we remembered the police and we remembered the ship and the beam of light immobilized the car. We remembered all of that. So yeah, we were taken aboard. It was an intrusive abduction. And former police chief Begall, I have to fast forward to September 1st, 2011, when I awakened. And I awakened by the word ufology. I saw it on the computer. Ufology. I thought, you mean there are actually people that study this? So he was a former Mufon state director. So I knew I could trust him, or I was ready, programmed to awaken. And I sent him an email telling him I might have a story he'd be interested in. And he called me immediately. And he said, tell me. And I said, I can't do that. I haven't spoken about it for 50 years. I explained that I did draw a picture of it every year or so, of the ship and the police. And then I would quickly throw it away, but I did that for my sanity. Well, he asked me to meet him, and I met him a couple days later, and he asked me to draw what I'd been drawing all those years. And he discussed why it was light to dark, and he asked me if I wondered if there was anything more to it than I had thought. Aliens or any of that bullcrap. But I was curious. I wanted to know, and he found a regression therapist. And the regression therapist had done 300 or 400 regressions, but never with someone who could possibly have abducted. And I didn't know if it would work. Anyway, it was the three of us. I called us the Three Musketeers. We went through 5 regressions. But after that first regression, I was chanting, my body is waving and rumbling to the low hum of the ship. So I knew. I sat up on the couch and I said, it's real. It's really, really real. That's when I knew. And I became obsessed with ufology.
Right.
And I wanted to know. I was ready. I was more than ready. And I went after Cindy, the other little girl. And I had illustrations that I had drawn that they were put in my head. They put these illustrations and pictures in my head until I draw them. And I had 3 at the time, and I took them over to Cindy's house. And she knew I meant business when I got there, and she knew what it was about. By the time I got to the second picture, she was shaking, and she said, you were gone. You were gone, and we couldn't find you. I think your father went down. My father went down to talk to your father, or he called your father. Now, Cindy hadn't even come to realization that she was on board at this point.
Wow.
And from 2011 to 2015, we shared, and I recorded many of our phone calls, and we shared our memories. And it was amazing, the things that we remembered together. And then the following month of October of 2011, the former police chief of Novi, Michigan awakened. So we all awakened within a month, 1 month period, and all of our memories. And the police chief said, I hadn't thought about that in years. Well, I believe we were all programmed not to think about it,
Right.
speak about it.
Could you give us like an example of, say, after the first regression therapy, what you remembered?
Well, the first regression therapy, I don't remember any of it except coming out of it saying my body is waving and rumbling to the low hum of the ship. And I was in a wave, an electrical energy wave, and it felt fantastic. Now, the second regression is when I remembered how they got me. And how they got me was, and I knew, they told me. They told me how they were going to get me. It was by a beam, and I've drawn pictures, and they're in the book, the first book, a beam that hit me in my back. And the second it hit me, I froze like a cartoon character. I was running home. In running position, I was, and I remember I was so mad and so frustrated because I couldn't move anything. And then from that is when they put me on my back and took me up. So the third regression was the magical regression. After that third regression, I didn't need to be regressed anymore because it opened Pandora's box and everything came flowing through. Everything started coming through, all the memories of what happened on board and Cindy. And
were they painful memories?
well, yes, only because I perceived them that way. What happened was Cindy was placed in a clear cylindrical tube suspended above me. And the reason she was on board was because I wouldn't stop. I said, get Cindy too. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to be alone. So they had brought her on board to appease me. And they took a needle, there were the grays, and they put the needle in my navel. And I remembered that it was extremely painful and crying. And I remember the one gray saying to me, looking me in the eyes and saying, we're going to do what we're going to do. And then we're going to let you'll go home and you're safe and you'll be home. So I relented at that point. I just, I realized there was nothing I could do. But after they were done, there was a nice one who helped me get dressed, and she was the only female on board. And she babied me. And she walked me back to and I called him the pilot, who looked just like anyone's father. And I was mad. I was a 12-year-old kid and I was pissed. And I said, Mister, why did you let them hurt me? And he said, your pain was perceived. Then I was even more furious because he was telling me that it really didn't happen.
Was he alien or human?
Well, later I would find out, after my third regression, that he was alien. But he had shown himself as human so not to frighten me.
Right.
But he told me to find the positive in everything. Through love, we are able to find the positive in every perception. So after that third and it was a reptilian, and it's in the book, webbed feet, scales. He was wearing a cape. And after I drew the image, I was told to write beneath it, see me as I am. And I realized that this was the pilot on the ship, who was a reptilian being. And everything was new to me then. The state director, the former state director, Mufon, wasn't involved with Mufon at that time, but he said, you know, you should go to a couple of the meetings. I think it'd be good for you to be with people of like kind. Little did he know. In fact, the regression therapist went with me. We also of Mr. They would tell me how awful reptilians are. They eat babies, you know, the whole Ike thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you have no idea. You're not even experiencers with reptilians. And it got to the point where I realized that they didn't believe me. This was too much. They didn't believe me. And I asked the one, am I credible? And he said, credible? You're incredible. We don't even have a place to put your stories. We don't even have a frame of reference for your stories. So I was pretty upset, to say the least, with Mufon at that time. And even the abducted groups. I want to say how hard it is to come out as an experiencer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially when you're trying to
Well, in your case, Nancy, I can't see why there was doubt when there were so many witnesses to that experiences.
I had pictures of my pregnant stomach. I was 62 years old at the time. They didn't even want to look at the pictures. I mean, I really don't want to get into a battle about Mufon because my views have changed and Mufon has changed now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this was in 2011, 12, 13. But there is a real jealousy in between experiencers. It's ugly. It's a competition. And I'm so naive, and I'm still naive, and I'm not going to let that ever go. But so many see it as a competition. Whose story is the scariest? Well, my story isn't scary.